V.I. Lenin. The Peace Program. Published. Social Democrat No. 52, March 25, 1916. Published according to the Social Democrat text. Source: Lenin Collected Works, Moscow, Volume 22, pages 161 to 168. The question of the Social Democratic Peace Program is one of the most important questions on the agenda of the Second International Conference of the Zimmerwaldists. In order to bring home to the reader the essentials of this question, we will quote a declaration made by Kautsky, the most authoritative representative of the Second International and most authoritative champion of the social chauvinists in all countries. Quote, "The International is not a fit instrument in time of war, it is, essentially, an instrument of peace. The fight for peace, class struggle in peacetime." Neue Zeit. November 27, 1914. All peace programs formulated by the international programs of the Copenhagen, London and Vienna Congresses, all demand, and quite rightly, the recognition of the independence of nations. This demand must also serve as our compass in the present war. End of quote. Ibid, May 21, 1915. These few words excellently express the program of international social chauvinist unity and conciliation. Everybody knows that Südkomm's friends and adherents met in Vienna and acted entirely in his spirit, championing the cause of German imperialism under the cloak of defense of the fatherland. The French, English and Russian Südkomms met in London and championed the cause of their national imperialism under the same cloak. The real policy of the London and Vienna heroes of social chauvinism is to justify participation in the imperialist war, to justify the killing of German workers by French workers, and vice versa, for the sake of determining which national bourgeoisie shall have preference in robbing other countries. And to conceal their real policy, to deceive the workers, both the London and the Vienna heroes resort to the phrase, "We recognize the independence of nations," or in other words, recognizes the self-determination of nations, repudiate annexations, etc., etc. It is as clear as daylight that this recognition is a flagrant lie, despicable hypocrisy, for it justifies participation in a war which both sides are waging, not to make nations independent, but to enslave them. Instead of exposing, unmasking and condemning this hypocrisy, Kautsky, the great authority, sanctifies it. The unanimous desire of the chauvinist traitors to socialism to deceive the workers is, in Kautsky's eyes, proof of the unanimity and virility of the International on the question of peace. Kautsky converts nationalist, crude, obvious, flagrant hypocrisy, which is obvious to the workers, into international, subtle, cloaked hypocrisy, calculated to throw dust in the eyes of the workers. Kautsky's policy is 100 times more harmful and dangerous to the labor movement than Südkomm's policy. Kautsky's hypocrisy is 100 times more repulsive. This does not apply to Kautsky alone. Substantially the same policy is pursued by Axelrod, Martovanchkides in Russia, by Longwit and Pressmain in France, Treves in Italy, etc. Objectively, this policy means fostering bourgeois lies among the working class. It means inculcating bourgeois ideas into the minds of the proletariat. That both Südkomm and Plekhanov merely repeat the bourgeois lies of the capitalists of their respective nations is obvious, but it is not so obvious that Kautsky sanctifies these lies and elevates them to the sphere of the highest truth of a unanimous international. That the workers should regard the Südkomms and Plekhanovs as authoritative and unanimous socialists who have temporarily fallen out is exactly what the bourgeoisie wants. The very thing the bourgeoisie wants is that the workers should be diverted from the revolutionary struggle in wartime by means of hypocritical, idle and non-committal phrases about peace, that they should be lulled and soothed by hopes of peace without annexations, a democratic peace, etc., etc. Husmans has merely popularized Kautsky's peace program and has added, courts of arbitration, democratization of foreign politics, etc. But the first and fundamental point of a socialist peace program must be to unmask the hypocrisy of the Kautskyist peace program, which strengthens bourgeois influence over the proletariat. Let us recall the fundamental postulates of socialist doctrine, which the Kautskyists have distorted. War is the continuation, by forcible means, of the politics pursued by the ruling classes of the belligerent powers long before the outbreak of war. Peace is a continuation of the very same politics, with a registration of the changes brought about in the relation of forces of the antagonists as a result of military operations. War does not change the direction in which politics developed prior to the war, it only accelerates that development. The War of 1870–71 was a continuation of the progressive bourgeois policy, which was pursued for decades, of liberating and uniting Germany. The debacle and overthrow of Napoleon III hastened that liberation. The peace program of the socialists of that epoch took this progressive bourgeois result into account and advocated support for the democratic bourgeoisie, urging, no plunder of France, an honorable peace with the Republic. How clownish is the attempt slavishly to repeat this example under the conditions prevailing during the imperialist war of 1914–16. This war is the continuation of the politics of an overripe reactionary bourgeoisie, which has plundered the world, which has seized colonies, etc. Owing to the objective situation, the present war cannot, on the basis of bourgeois relations, lead to any democratic progress whatever, no matter what the outcome of the war may be. It can lead only to the intensification and extension of oppression in general, and of national oppression in particular. That war accelerated development in a democratic bourgeois progressive direction. It resulted in the overthrow of Napoleon III and in the unification of Germany. This war is accelerating development only in the direction of the socialist revolution. Then the program of a democratic, bourgeois, peace had an objective historical basis. Now there is no such basis, and all phrases about a democratic peace is a bourgeois lie, the objective purpose of which is to divert the workers from the revolutionary struggle for socialism. Then the socialists, by their program of a democratic peace, supported a deep-going bourgeois democratic movement of the masses, for the overthrow of Napoleon III and the unification of Germany, which had been manifesting itself for decades. Now, with their program of a democratic peace on the basis of bourgeois relations, the socialists are helping the deception of the people by the bourgeoisie, whose aim is to divert the proletariat from the socialist revolution. Just as phrases about defense of the fatherland inculcate into the minds of the masses the ideology of the national war of liberation by means of fraud, so phrases about a democratic peace inculcate that very same bourgeois lie in a roundabout way. That means that you have no peace program, that you are opposed to democratic demands, the Trotskyists argue, in the hope that inattentive people will not notice that this objection substitutes non-existent bourgeois democratic tasks for the existing socialist tasks. Oh no, gentlemen, we reply to the Trotskyists. We are in favor of democratic demands, we alone fight for them sincerely, for the objective historical situation prevents us from advancing them except in connection with the socialist revolution. Take, for example, the compass which Kautsky and company employ for the bourgeois deception of the workers. Sudcombe and Plekhanov are unanimous in their peace program. Down with annexations. Support the independence of nations. And note this, the Sudcombes are right when they say that Russia's attitude towards Poland, Finland, etc., is an annexationist attitude. And so is Plekhanov right when he says that Germany's attitude towards Alsace-Lorraine, Serbia, Belgium, etc., is also annexationist. Both are right, are they not? And in this way Kautsky reconciles the German Sudcombe with the Russian Sudcombes. But every sensible worker will see immediately that Kautsky and both the Sudcombes are hypocrites. This is obvious. The duty of a socialist is not to make peace with hypocritical democracy, but to unmask it. How can it be unmasked? Very simply. Recognition of the independence of nations can be regarded as sincere only where the representative of the oppressing nation has demanded, both before and during the war, freedom of secession for the nation which is oppressed by his own fatherland. This demand alone is in accord with Marxism. Marx advanced it in the interests of the English proletariat when he demanded freedom for Ireland, although he admitted at the same time the probability that federation would follow secession. In other words, he demanded the right of secession, not for the purpose of splitting and isolating countries, but for the purpose of creating more durable and democratic ties. In all cases where there are oppressed and oppressing nations, where there are no special circumstances which distinguish revolutionary democratic nations from reactionary nations, as was the case in the 40s of the 19th century, Marx's policy in relation to Ireland must serve as a model for proletarian policy. But imperialism is precisely the epoch in which the division of nations into oppressors and oppressed is the essential and typical division, and it is utterly impossible to draw a distinction between reactionary and revolutionary nations in Europe. As early as 1913, our party, in a resolution on the national question, made it the duty of Social Democrats to apply the term self-determination in the sense here indicated, and the war of 1914–16 has fully shown that we were right. Take Kautsky's latest article in the Neue Zeit of March 3, 1916. He openly declares himself to be in agreement with Austerlitz, the notorious, extreme German chauvinist in Austria, the editor of the chauvinist Vienna Arbeiterzeitung, when he says that the independence of a nation must not be confused with its sovereignty. In other words, national autonomy within a nationality state is good enough for the oppressed nations, and it is not necessary to demand for them the equal right to political independence. In this very article, however, Kautsky asserts that it is impossible to prove that it is essential for the Poles to adhere to the Russian state. What does this mean? It means that to please Hindenburg, Südkomm, Austerlitz and Co., Kautsky recognizes Poland's right to secede from Russia, although Russia is a nationality state, but not a word does he say about freedom for the Poles to secede from Germany. In this very article Kautsky declares that the French socialists had departed from internationalism by wanting to achieve the freedom of Alsace-Lorraine by means of war. But he says nothing about the German Südkomms and Company deviating from internationalism when they refused to demand freedom for Alsace-Lorraine to secede from Germany. Kautsky employs the phrase a nationality state, a phrase that can be applied to England in relation to Ireland, and to Germany in relation to Poland, Alsace-Lorraine, etc., obviously for the purpose of defending social chauvinism. He has converted the slogan "Fight against annexations" into a program of peace with the chauvinists, into glaring hypocrisy. And in this very article, Kautsky repeats the honeyed little Yuda's speech: the International has never ceased to demand the consent of the affected populations when state frontiers are to be altered. Is it not clear that Südkomm and Company demand the consent of the Alsatians and Belgians to be annexed to Germany, and that Austerlitz and Company demand the consent of the Poles and Serbs to be annexed to Austria? And what about the Russian Kautskyist Martov? He wrote to the Gvozderist journal Nashgolos, Samuro, to prove the indisputable truth that self-determination of nations does not necessarily imply defense of the fatherland in an imperialist war. But Martov says nothing about the fact that a Russian social democrat betrays the principle of self-determination if he does not demand the right of secession for the nations oppressed by the Great Russians, and in this way Martov stretches out the hand of peace to the Aleksinskis, the Gvozdevs, the Dotrasovs, and the Polekhanovs. Martov is silent on this point also in the underground press. He argues against the Dutchman Gorter, although Gorter, while wrongly repudiating the principle of self-determination of nations, correctly applies it by demanding political independence for the Dutch Indies and by unmasking the betrayal of socialism by the Dutch opportunists who disagree with this demand. Martov, however, does not argue against his secretary, Semkovsky, who in 1912–15 was the only writer in the liquidationist press who repudiated the right of secession and self-determination in general. Is it not plain that Martov advocates self-determination just as hypocritically as Kautsky does, that he, too, is covering up his desire to make peace with the chauvinists? And what about Trotsky? He is body and soul for self-determination, but in his case, too, it is an idle phrase, for he does not demand freedom of secession for nations oppressed by the fatherland of the socialist of the given nationality. He is silent about the hypocrisy of Kautsky and the Kautskyists. This kind of struggle against annexations serves to deceive the workers and not to explain the program of the Social Democrats. It is an evasion of the problem and not a concrete indication of the duty of internationalists. It is a concession to nationalist prejudices and to the selfish interests of nationalism. We all, bourgeois and social chauvinists alike, derive benefits from our fatherland's oppression of other nations, but not a struggle against nationalism. The peace program of social democracy must, in the first place, unmask the hypocrisy of the bourgeois, social chauvinist and Trotskyist phrases about peace. This is the first and fundamental thing. Unless we do that, we shall be willingly or unwillingly helping to deceive the masses. Our peace program demands that the principal democratic point on this question, the repudiation of annexations, should be applied in practice and not in words, that it should serve to promote the propaganda of internationalism, not of national hypocrisy. In order that this may do so, we must explain to the masses that the repudiation of annexations, that is, the recognition of self-determination, is sincere only when the socialists of every nation demand the right of secession for the nations that are oppressed by their nations. As a positive slogan, one capable of drawing the masses into the revolutionary struggle and explaining the necessity for adopting revolutionary measures to attain a democratic peace, we must advance the slogan, repudiation of the national debt. Finally, our peace program must explain that the imperialist powers and the imperialist bourgeoisie cannot grant a democratic peace. Such a peace must be sought and fought for, not in the past, not in a reactionary utopia of a non-imperialist capitalism, nor in a league of equal nations under capitalism, but in the future, in the socialist revolution of the proletariat. Not a single fundamental democratic demand can be achieved to any considerable extent, or any degree of permanency, in the advanced imperialist states, except by revolutionary battles under the banner of socialism. Whoever promises the nations a democratic peace without at the same time preaching the socialist revolution, or while repudiating the struggle for it, the struggle which must be carried on now, during the war, is deceiving the proletariat.